Hello, friends. Welcome once again to the Perfect Bound Podcast. This is a podcast all about anything and everything comic books and comics related, brought to you by the Panel Jumper and Comics Engine. My name is Ben. With me, as always, is Chris Casso.
Hello.
Cole Hornaday.
Hey there.
Nicole Lamb.
Hello.
How is everybody this evening?
Good.
It's cold. Cold.
It always gets cold when we record. I don't know why.
Oh, well.
It's just for me, though. Just for me.
It's because I suck all the heat out of the room.
You do. You're like, oh.
I need to lean into the microphone here. It's because
All right.
I suck all the heat out of the room.
So, this is episode 60 for Monday, April 4th, and you know what's going to happen this weekend? The Emerald City Comicon coming up in just a couple days. We hope you have your tickets. We have ours. I don't really have a ticket.
Nah.
All right, so this is your last chance to listen to us talk about it before the thing actually happens. And what should we look out for? We didn't really talk about what we were going to talk about before we started rolling, so I'm sorry to put y'all on the spot here, but
We're kind of terrible comic fans that way, because I'm not going to be going this time.
Neither
because
am
I'm
I.
too busy
Yeah,
and I can't afford
in
it.
the store the whole
And I-
time, and I'm going
I
to be
just
at the
never-
booth the whole time.
And I never
right.
get on the stick and buy tickets, and I always wait too long because I can't afford it. And you know, and people always ask me, "Are you going to go?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not going to go."
There is going to be a neat panel focusing on Steve Leiber, I believe. I believe it's hosted by a friend of ours. And Steve Leiber is a really, really amazing talent that I don't think gets enough attention. I think he's got a few new projects coming out, one from Image called The Fix. So if you hear about that that panel, it's worth checking out, I think. It's going to be kind of just about his role in the industry and just his work. So
cool. All right. Check that out. Check out the Emerald City Comic Con running this weekend at the Washington State Convention and Trade Center, right there smack in the middle of downtown Seattle, just a few lovely blocks from where I live. I used to be able to see it, but they're building this big building right across the street from my apartment, so I can't see anything. It's blocking downtown from me, so kind of sad. Anyway, let's move on to one of our two topics for this evening. The first one is lettering. Now, we've talked about lettering before, but this actually was brought up because of just an offhanded comment that Chris made in a previous episode, where he mentioned that it was written in dialect.
Oh, right.
And
Keith Richards.
I actually, and I'm like, oh, I hate it when that happens. And I do, because I have read it in the very few comics that I've read. I have come across where the dialect is written into the text, and it's super annoying.
Yeah.
It's are we talking lettering or like the phonetics?
Well, I know that these are two
Phonetics.
different things. We're going to touch on both of them.
Okay,
But
all
right
right.
now, let's talk about the phonetics. Let's talk about writing in dialect.
Now, in defense of it, Garth Ennis's Preacher, one of the main characters, Cassidy, Irish vampire, never had a problem reading his dialect. In fact, there was always an argument I read about why that series was great, and it was if you took all the art out and just left the word balloons, you'd instantly know every character by their voice. But that's like the strength of Garth Ennis's storytelling.
Yeah.
And skills as a writer.
Yeah, and I think that's a case where that dialect really worked and was translated well.
You can talk about our space.
And then there's our space, which
Yeah,
was
and-
just
yeah.
mumbling.
Yeah.
Well, but no, he had cohesive dialogue.
did.
It was just unintelligible, and it was written to be unintelligible. and half the time when that character was speaking, I had to read it out loud, and that's what happens frequently. And that's where I take issue with your dislike, because I think that's kind of an indication of a gifted storyteller who actually sits down and works out the mechanics of those sounds and tries to convey them as best of their ability on paper in word form. You know, say the discussion. I think that we originally hit on this discussion when we were talking about Dave Sim, right? Yeah. And how he would write out his characters in Cerebus the Aardvark. He'd write out the characters' dialogue phonetically, and I thought it was fascinating. Chris just thought it was annoying.
I will always respect the work put into it, but I will not respect the slog they put me through.
Yeah, you
it
develop a
stops
rhythm.
You. Yeah, it does.
And sometimes it's better than others. So I think specifically it was having to read Keith Richards that killed me.
Okay.
I'm trying to think of other examples.
Well, Garth Ennis also did a series called Dicks.
Yes.
And the the language in that, the dialect in that one gets rougher.
Rougher, yeah.
And it makes you stop and really have to sound it out and do all that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can get it, and I find that interesting how somebody sat there and figured it out to where you could read it and go, yeah, it does sound like that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it takes me 5 minutes to read that one balloon, so
Right.
it's like a plus and a minus,
Well, but there are successful writers. I always think of John Kennedy Toole's Confederacy of Dunces, and how he meticulously gave you the dialects of these different characters in New Orleans, from identify them in the different not boroughs. What do they call the neighborhoods in New Orleans?
In New Orleans?
Yeah.
My New Orleans
Parishes,
is gonna kill me.
parishes,
this.
yeah,
I lived
and those people in the know in reading the book could identify where those characters are from, and I thought that was fascinating. It's a lot of hard work, and a lot of authors like Pynchon and I'm trying. People just loathe trying to read those books because of the Finian's Rainbow. James Joyce. People either praise or vilify Joyce for how he writes that character's language, and I find it fascinating. But it's just it just takes some work to dial into it. It's like listening to Shakespeare.
Right.
It takes you a moment to dial into it. All
Okay,
right.
so it's one thing.
Ben's got the smirk. Here we go.
It's one thing to write an entire book in a dialect, because you will eventually get accustomed to reading what is being written. But when you're reading a comic and you develop a certain flow while you're reading, and every once in a while when that one character talks, you gotta stop.
And then Gambit shows up, and you have to listen to Gambit. Yeah.
Yeah.
I find if you take issue with him, you take issue with me too, sir.
I always take issue with you. Why should that be any different?
Yeah. It's just I think I read comics a lot slower than most everyone here, actually. So to have a dialect in there as well as also just trying to get the comic itself, it makes it much harder for me.
You probably look
And
at
I'm
all
lazy.
the artwork as well. I find sometimes that I just skip over the artwork.
Sometimes I do. It depends on what
Yeah.
I'm reading.
Now, as a subclassification of this, what do you guys think about when somebody will put in a different language without subtitles? They'll put the time to put the entire German language in
Have
there.
someone translate
Nothing
it.
but Nazis, but no translation in what you're reading. Is that kind of cool because you're like, well, now I have to go do the homework? Or is that kind of cool because, when you're watching Indiana Jones, you don't always, they don't subtitle all the random grunts saying Achtung, Achtung.
I would just assume that the author didn't care if I knew what this character was saying.
Right.
Or they wanted you to work for
Are
it.
you
like
getting an up?
Eleanor.
Are you challenged as a reader to figure out what's happening by the visuals and the texture of the language that's going on?
Yeah.
I think it speaks to verisimilitude. I enjoy it. I respect the fact that it's challenging, but and that it will jerk you out of the through line of the story.
Then there's also
but I don't think it's a bad thing all the time.
The flip side of Saga, where they have their own language. It's like a
Right.
mix of all these different things. So you don't
Ever know what it
You don't
is.
ever know.
Yeah.
So I like it where I can actually look up a translation if I want to know and
Right.
find out something from there. But also, what did I say?
Well, I also like options because IDW is about to print a 4-issue Star Trek series in 2 formats, one in English and the other in Klingon. And I'm sure that
like
they
that.
actually probably got some actual proper Klingon translation. It's a weird sentence to say.
No, it isn't, sir. They have developed that
Yes.
language.
Yeah.
Well, there's a guy who developed Dothraki and High Valerian,
Yeah.
there's that's there. So it's but I like the idea of well, that's cool. Oh, you have the English version. Thank God.
Yeah.
Right,
So it's I like the options aspect as well, but a lot of work goes into that.
Yeah.
They have to reset their entire printing press stuff to get that, down there.
Well, just think about the linguists who sit down and work that out. That's like math to me. That's just beyond me.
Then they have to figure out a font for Klingon.
Right?
True that. Yeah.
Oh man, I haven't thought of that. What does a Comic Sans type font for Klingon look like?
Bold.
It's a lot of jagged edges.
Yeah. Just very
Yeah.
bold.
Going back to the disruption in flow when you're reading, I think that's my biggest peeve. I appreciate that they have gone through the effort to phoneticize dialect. I appreciate that they want me to think about what this character is saying. One of my favorite authors is a gal by the name of Mary Roach, and she has written a number of books, like science-based. She wrote her very first book was called Stiff, The Curious Science of Human Cadavers. Fantastic book.
Don't you have that book? I thought you had that book.
I don't own it, but I love that book.
Yeah, you should check it out
It's
if you
great.
haven't read it. She wrote one on like space travel. She wrote one on ghosts, one on sex. There's a new one coming out. I don't know what it is, but I can't wait to buy it. She is very footnote happy, and it's. And I love her to death, but it's so frustrating reading these books because your eyes have to dart to the bottom of the page every other paragraph because she's like got a joke or something in the footnotes. And so speaking to the comics and how it stops your flow, yeah, I think it's annoying. I appreciate it.
It's also there. It gives you something extra too sometimes. Like with the footnotes, it gives you something extra that you can either take or leave.
Yeah, take it or leave it.
Dialect, you can't really, you just skip the word bubble.
Right. This is what I generally do, I guess. But, that character's speaking in like a thick Texas drawl. I don't need to understand what they're saying. All right, so moving on. Do you have something else to say about it?
I was just going to say, since it's a visual narrative, your eyes are already overloading.
Yeah.
Because you might be looking into more aesthetic details, and alternate styles of phonetics do actually challenge your eyes at the same time that your brain's trying to communicate visual imagery into a new narrative that your brain can understand. So suddenly having to read Gambit talk can actually kill me because it's like, well, no, but I was really trying to focus on your panel layout here. Now suddenly I have to try and figure out why there's all these extra E's and apostrophes or something, you know. So if they can find a way to make the illustration of the phoneticization into part of the visual aesthetic, bonus points. I made up some words there, didn't I?
You mean
Phoneticization?
Yeah, you mean like the way
Copyright that.
Howard Chaykin used to work his text or his onomatopoeic. Sometimes it was dialogue, but most of the time it was sound effects that became part of the illustrations. And I know you don't care for Chaykin, but that was one aspect of, say, his American Flag series that I loved, and how those sound effects, you know, like the chatter of a rail gun or the buzz of an automobile would get worked into the visual rhythm of the story. I just thought that was not a lot of illustrators could do that, and he did that very, very well.
I swear that a couple years ago there were a few different people at Marvel that were having a contest with each other to do the most of that in the most inventive ways. And like in a Brubaker Daredevil comic, there's a sequence where a ninja tries to stab Foggy Nelson, and the sound effect for the sword slashing was sword. And then in the Incredible Hercules series, Greg Pak and Fred Van Lente, you just know for a fact they were trying to like mess with people, and you get stuff like when they punched the Sentry, who's a character who loved to throw villains into the sun. He got punched off panel, and the sound effect was into the sun. You know, and then there's one where like Hercules nipple pinches Thor, and like nipple pinch is like the sound effect.
I just finished reading the first 3 trades of God Hates Astronauts,
they
and
do that.
They do tons of
all over the
it's
book.
all over that.
Yeah.
Like skeleton when somebody gets fried and it's just their skeleton left. Yeah.
Somebody gets the beer knocked out of their hand. De-beer.
Yeah, it's great. It adds to the comedy.
Yeah,
it adds to the fun.
It also slows down your reading of the comic because you have to read every single word. Like if I'm just saying wham, bang or whatever, my brain doesn't really need to register that. But if I'm seeing like wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, I have to read that, which is an actual
mugged.
Mugged. God Hates Astronauts, one of my favorites.
Awesome.
All right, so let's talk about different styles of lettering and different fonts. I actually read a superhero comic. I think you made me read Civil War, and every time Iron Man spoke when he was in the Iron Man suit, he's got like a red-ish font and like more like a roboticized font.
Yeah.
I was flipping through a comic the other before we started rolling. I believe it was Amazing Forest, where the text is actually typewritten. which you don't see in at least I don't see all that often in a mainstream comic. And it looked weird.
When Dark Horse had the rights to do the Conan comic years back, they did a really cool thing to sort of reintroduce readers to the fact that, Robert E. Howard's original Conan comic book was a pulp. So all of the narrative font was old Underwood typewriter font, but with a dirty ribbon. So it was like right off Robert E. Howard's typewriter, and the O's were blacked out, and the letters were misaligned sometimes, and I loved that aspect of the comic book. It jerked you out of it, but it reminded you of where those stories came from. That Conan didn't start with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Conan didn't start with comic book. It started with the pulps, where you actually were reading these, quick fix stories. And they lost touch with that down the line. Dark Horse did. Who was doing? Do you remember who was doing those adaptations? I don't right off the top. Who was writing them? Anyway,
sorry.
Those early ones I recommend. Anyway, what do you got?
Oh no, I was just looking for examples, and in this book I'm going to review later, there's a demon named Bacchus who has slightly fancy dialogue, like a font, and that's something that I tend to see often with demons. And
do you see a lot of demons?
All the time. But something else though, sometimes there are books where they will change the character's font into cursive, and it's like, oh god, or they turn it into ye old medieval speak, and it goes really fancy, and it's like, oh no. And I'm the back of Alan Moore's Providence books are all in journal format, and the guy has the most beautiful handwriting, the fictional character does. I can't read more than it's 5 pages of journal, and the smallest cursive, and it's no.
I am really enjoying that book, but I got to tell you, I do not read the journals. I was going to save them for later, and now 10 issues in, and I don't know if I can do it.
I was going to skip them, but then I started learning that there's actually importance.
Well, that's what we were reviewing the book, when it first came out, and Nicole was talking about reading the journal and learning lots of really crucial character stuff, and I'm like, oh, I didn't get that. Yeah.
Well, Thor always has a different. Anyone from the Asgardian lands always has a different
so
type,
fancy.
and so you get this voice in your head, not a bad one, but of what Thor sounds like or what somebody from there.
I think the one, and there's sometimes it's an aspect of the character's brand. In particular, Swamp Thing used to always have the crusty yellow bubbles.
There's also the bubbles
jagged.
too.
Because
Sejak Japan. I need to find out how to say his name right.
Yeah.
But he did Death Vigil, and he does Sunstone, and
sometimes their word balloons are skulls that are kind of ethereal.
And so it's not necessarily the text itself, but the words around it, or whatever the bubble around it.
And I can't remember what book I'm remembering, but there was a character who was ancient, and his word bubbles were instead scrolls. They were fancily designed scrolls. So it's that's cool. You gave it an aesthetic touch, So yeah.
There was one book that you might be able to help me with it. It's Michael Zuli's The Universe of the Fracture Boy. Is that what it's called?
Oh, yeah.
What was that one called?
Yep, I have it, and I don't remember the name of it.
And I just
keep going. I'm going to look it up.
But so he did a lot of different lettering in that, and that was beautiful, and that added to the artwork, and that added to the narrative and everything. And I felt like that was one where I wouldn't even. I would show off the artwork, but I would also be like, and look at the lettering. It was just specific to that. It was a big part of it.
You were close. The Fracture of the Universal Boy.
Yes.
Yeah, he did a Kickstarter to do that. It's a lovely. It's this huge book with these lovely illustrations that has a story that's just so freaking surreal. It makes no sense, but.
Sorry, just flashback. As far as an inventive play within the story, it got kind of meta. But there's an issue of Amazing Spider-Man where Dr. Doom is entering an airport, and he's being brought in by American guards. And so it's a diplomatic mission he's on, and he enters the room, and Dr. Doom, he's just so says Dr. Doom. And when he says his name, it's in super bold, fancy dialect. And one of the guards looks at him, he's like, how do you do that? And Doctor Doom's just like, what? And the guy's just like, how do you speak big like that?
Was that Deadpool who said that?
No, it was Captain America in disguise. But yeah, it was like a Straczynski issue of Spider-Man. So like, if you could stop and have fun with stuff like that, because all Marvel characters, because of Stan Lee, he go into a super Shakespeare mode, and you have this like suddenly everything turns bold, and that one word is 5 times bigger than it needs to be.
Yeah.
And
I like it when they play with the form.
Yeah.
Except when they try to like write dialect, apparently.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes it's good when you have a lot of people talking to each other off panel. The coloring, like you said, like well, you were alluding to something like Iron Man sounds more robotic.
Yeah.
But then there's also things where they'll have the box of somebody talking off panel, and they'll have like a color around it to be like, this person is so and so.
You know who it is.
They're green. They're red.
Well, and didn't Bendis do the? Was it he that did the cool things with Doctor Strange? Whenever Doctor Strange would cast a spell, and there's a hypertext that identifies
What the spell is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the red rings of Ragador spell number 37. And you almost are looking for an asterisk to a footnote somewhere.
yeah. There's this comic here that's the Ghostbusters Deviations, and the Marshmallow Stay Puffman is speaking, and it looks gooey. Mm-hmm. That's a win.
Yeah.
It looks
It's
demonically gooey.
Puff. Kind of evil.
All right.
Very puppy.
We will be revisiting that in a bit. All right. So lettering, play with the form.
Have fun with it.
Write American English. Don't write Texan. Don't write whatever Gambit's.
Gumbo. No, I'm just kidding.
Patois.
Creole.
It's patois.
And that's just because I want to maintain the
flow.
rhythm, the flow when I read a comic. I don't want to have to stop. Anyway, let's move on to talk about independent creators. Now, the reason I brought this up is because I have a couple of friends who have created a comic. And I don't believe they have any plans to print it or market it in a comic book store. It's going to be web only. But it is written and drawn as a traditional comic book. Mm-hmm. And it looks really great. I saw the first few pages of it online. And that got me to wondering how an independent creator... See, this is a public service we do here at Perfect Bomb Podcast. How an independent creator can self-publish and get their book in a store. Mm-hmm. Now, self-publishing can, it's as easy or difficult as you make it. You can print it out on a copier and staple it, or you can have it professionally bound by companies like Create Space, where you just print on demand kind of thing. Mm-hmm. How do you get it into the store? How do you get people to read it? Mm-hmm. Do you, as a manager of a comic book store, just accept submissions right off the street?
I'll take a look at anything anybody brings us, and then I have to decide if I feel it's appropriate or if I have the audience here. And sometimes I make leaps of faith, and I'm like, this definitely doesn't appeal to me, but I think maybe it might appeal to somebody else. But there are, like, as far as approaching the store, it's nice to come in, be polite, figure out the right time and the right person to talk to. You don't want to hound the store. Right. You don't want to bug us. Don't call me on Tuesday night. Somebody did yesterday. Tuesday night is generally most comic book stores' inventory night. And it's just like, I'm really happy that you reached out to us, but you did choose the worst day of the week to do it. Mm-hmm. Send me an email, maybe, and then in the email be like, hey, do you mind if I call you about this? And give us all the information, maybe have a little bit of a sales pitch. What is it, how can I sell it to somebody, like give me an elevator pitch for the plot. Mm-hmm. Little quick thing, please try to have a barcode if you can. If not, be conscientious of exactly how much you're charging for it, because sometimes people, like, a lot of time and effort goes into it, I get it, but you are competing against 1 billion comics, and compare the size of your comic and how much you think you can get for it, and be honest with yourself, and just price reasonably.
Do your research.
Well, and have like a wholesale price for a store, as opposed to just be selling retail when we're
Right.
What we get a lot of creators, but not a lot of business people, and that's fine. But you should get a few of the basics down. You know, I've gone to conventions before and being like, we'd like to buy copies of your book and sell it at the stores, you know, so can we do a wholesale? And they look at me and they're just like, what's that? And it's just like, it's, you know, cost. Well, it cost me to make this much. And it's like, okay, you didn't have to tell me that. How much do you want for it? And it's just like, well, it's a $5 comic. I'd like to get $3. I'm like, okay, that's not a great percentage. Usually stores are used to at least a 50%, but we can work with you, you know. There's a local creator who did a book called Thoughts from Iceland, and we set up like a level of like, I'd always like to have 5 copies of your book. And he checks in like every month or two to be like, hey, how are you doing? Is the book still there? Do you need more? You know, maybe I can't come in, but maybe I can mail it to you. You know, there's just levels of like, it's good to check in because we have our own inventory to manage, and sometimes we like things to go away, so we will forget that your thing was here at times. You know, because for us, it's just like that turned over and it took 3 months. I don't want another one of it. You know, so take things like that into consideration. You know, square footage costs money.
Right.
And if we're going to hold your thing as a basic item, you know, like we have a dedicated amount of space for Saga and for Watchmen. You know, not to be brutal, but why should we have a dedicated space for your thing if I only sell 1 copy a year? You know, so little things just to take into account.
And there's some people who, like Phil Folio, he does a webcomic, and then he'll go to Kickstarter to get it printed. And you can read it online, or if you want a hardbound edition, you can do that. Or like Noelle Stevenson, who's already a name. She already has a following. She made a webcomic called Nimona. And then she decided that she wanted that to go to print, and she got it through put it in through our distributor of Diamond, so we were able to get it that way. And you can't read it online anymore now; it's just a print comic. So she's actually cut it off. Other people like Brittany Williams, she didn't necessarily do a comics, but she did stuff online, and she finally broke through the industry. Now she does stuff for the industry as well. Maybe she'll create her own stuff as well. I think a lot of the online sources where you get your stuff out there, it's kind of like your portfolio too. So if you want to be in the industry, that's an in, or if you just want to do that thing and then maybe put it into print one day. A lot of people do Kickstarter for that.
That sounds like a great business model, and I'm not just saying this because we've met and worked with Phil Folio on the last Panel Jumper Live, but building your audience on the web, and then having them pay for a hardcover.
You have a safety net in place, and you have a brand that's ready to go.
And you're also free to create. You know, you're not necessarily bound by schedules unless you're promising people if you're doing a Patreon or something. And you're
free to experiment with your media.
Yeah.
Because you can play with digital things. Emily Carroll is a creator who Scott McCloud calls it the infinite canvas. There's no limits to being digital. You could change the way you look. Now, you also don't want to shoot yourself in the foot and let's say you create the greatest story ever, but it literally can't be printed in a square format. You know, be careful with stuff like that. But yeah, you can experiment, change things, change the style of the book that's going to be published. And that's what Kickstarter is for. You can make these goals and be like, hey, you know, I want to make something that's the weirdest size and shape ever. Help me budget this. But I know that there's like 10,000 of you following me. So I think we can do this. And, you know, I'm going to do the research and figure out the realistic logistics of this.
Or even one more thing. You have a dedicated amount of comics. Say you've made like 2 volumes worth of comics, and you've been doing this, you have a fan base. You can then go to a publisher and say, I have this stuff. Would you like to print it? And then you take it out of your hands, and they help to advertise for you and do all that sort of legwork. Of course, there's fees and things like that. So there's other options. But like the guy who does Bad Machinery, he's doing Giant Days, and all his stuff's in print, but Bad Machinery is a webcomic. You know, and it's in a weird format, but, you know, it's in print, you know, so you have all these different options of ways to go. You could self-publish, you could never publish, you could webcomic, you could...
And smart publishers are on the hunt for things. So we've seen books that were, you know, years ago would have had difficulty finding a publishing home, suddenly they're getting snatched up by the likes of Image or other people like that. Because God Hates Astronauts was a webcomic first.
Yeah.
And what's the other? Octopus Pie was does the webcomic stuff, and then she has a Patreon. She's been able to add color, get more help, do more things. Meredith Gran, and she now has picked up new trades are published by Image. So it's just like boom, you know.
Yeah. So
Wasn't
it's a good way.
DC doing something for a while where they were printing webcomics? It was a really interesting experiment. There were a series of different online comics.
They were kind of voted in,
and they were serialized like weekly, bi-weekly, or whatever. And I followed those for a while, and I think, ultimately it would be an audience vote of which book would actually see life in print. And it kind of collapsed in on itself, which is unfortunate. There was one Bayou was one of the
was a big
books
one.
that I thought was quite
know.
good.
The
And there's still
reason-
like a volume 2 in stock, but number 1 is out of print.
Yeah,
And there's a
I
lot
read
of-
that online. I thought it was fascinating.
there's a lot of different you could probably find faults in a lot of different ways, but consistently I think the fault was that DC didn't really attempt to find the audience for it and to market it to the proper markets. They marketed it to a comic book direct market store market, wrong place. You need to get that in the Barnes & Noble, and you need to get a lot of that stuff into the hands of manga reading young girls. And they didn't try. They were just like, here, we made an attempt, but we didn't really make an attempt, you know?
Well, they had several different kinds of books of capitalizing on different genres.
Yep.
Yeah.
And each one of those represented a different market.
Yeah.
I feel like if they brought that back now would be that time.
Yeah, it would be
now
a
is
better
a good
time.
time for that.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
but DC's not going to
If
be
somebody
the
else brought that
organization
back
to do
up,
that.
Okay, maybe not DC.
Every once in a while, Oni Press has an open submission call where they're like, just send us your stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll like it. Maybe we'll publish it for you. So lesson learned: if you're a creator, don't give up hope. You can get your stuff out there. It just takes perseverance, some elbow grease, and probably a lot of rejection letters.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna have a lot of no's.
Yeah.
and I feel like the webcomic thing is a great way to hone
Yeah.
your skills, to keep yourself consistent, to get something out there, to see. I mean, a lot like Sunstone. That was just something that wasn't supposed to actually be a published comic, and now it's a published comic, and people are crazy about it. So you never know what's gonna happen. It's
You
gonna
never
unfold.
know.
And on those rejection letters, or if you take your portfolio to places, sometimes you'll get people who are just making a bad call. But other times, these are industry professionals who have a lot of experience. So it's, listen carefully, compromise when necessary.
Yeah.
Sometimes I've heard some sad stories, and then you could tell that creator later regretted that they said a certain thing to an upcoming talent. Sometimes you just catch people on a bad day when you get a
Yeah.
rejection letter.
Yeah.
But a lot of times, there's some guys that really, listen to them. They've been doing it long enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, let's move on to that. That's a great conversation. I had no idea it was going to go on for so long and have such great information. But let's move on to Book Report, everybody. And I'm actually going to review something today.
What?
Because I have routines, right? On the days we record, I stop at Dick's Drive-In, I get a deluxe and fries, and then I go over to the gas station and get some candy and a bottle of water. And then I come here early and I read a comic so I can have something to talk about. And today I read Ghostbusters International #2 from IDW. They go to Italy, and it says here it's printed in Italy. I don't know if that's actually true. Ooh, it's got a nice back. Look at that. So it takes place it's a #2. #1, they battle some acid spewing demon. There's a short recap in the beginning, and Egon has a bit of an accident, and he stays back. But the Ghostbusters are some guy wants them to bust ghosts on his real estate because he thinks it increases the value. So they go to Italy, and it's basically just the beginning of the story. They just arrive there. And Peter has like a run-in with what I think is a witch. I don't know. When I was growing up, I was everything Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters came out when I think I was 8 years old, and then I was in like a cartoon watching age when the Ghostbusters cartoon was out, the real Ghostbusters, not that fake Ghostbusters cartoon. Forget about that one. Do you all remember that other Ghostbusters?
I had the toys because there was a talking gorilla.
Anyway.
Tracy the talking gorilla.
So I It's great. It's interesting because when I'm reading this book, I can hear the cartoon voice actors in my head, and not the actual, like, not Bill Murray. I hear Lorenzo Music, because he's the guy who did the voice of Peter Venkman in the old Ghostbusters cartoon. Anyway, I liked it. I'm probably not gonna like go back and read number 1 or continue on. I think $4 an issue is a bit much. What do you think, Chris? Is that standard for that book?
Yeah, that's standard for IDW.
Okay.
Did you like the artwork?
I gotta tell you, I'm not crazy about the character design.
Okay.
The artwork's great, but it's just the characters. And there's one more thing about the layout of the pages. A lot of the panels are like cinema aspect ratio. They take one entire page, the length of an entire page. Now, there are breaks here and there, but I appreciate the sort of respect to cinema that the book has.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this team, Burnham on writing and Shonin on art, they've been the consistent Ghostbuster team for IDW for like 3 years now. So there's a very particular vision, tone, and voice happening.
Yeah, and I can see that because every time I've picked up a Ghostbusters comic, they've all looked the same. It's just aesthetically, the design of Peter Venkman, I just can't go for that. No can do. All right. Hashtag Hall & Oates. All right. Let's move on to, let's say, Nicole. What did you read this week?
I read Cat Dad, King of the Goblins by Britt Wilson. And it starts off with one of my favorite things, which is pretty much like a handbook scenario.
Right.
Name, age, likes, dislikes, all that kind of thing. And it's very cute. The mom, it's a family. It's 2 girls, some toad guy. That's never really explained, but doesn't have to be. And then the mom and the dad, who she's turned into a cat. And she, for some reason, has some sort of magical powers. It's kind of a mystical land. And I just love that... the thing about Cat Dad, it said, right now he's a cat. Normally he isn't. Currently he hates having his tail pulled, being rubbed the wrong way, and any amount of water. He likes sleeping, catnip, all that kind of stuff. But that's good because it actually plays into the story. So this handbook things, at some point they use the rubbing the wrong way to work to their advantage. But the cat runs off and gets captured by goblins. They think that he has saved them and helped them prosper, so they make him the king. And the art style in it is very cute. I would say that this is a very good depiction of comics winning as a visual medium, because of all the different things that are drawn in there add to the humor, add to the story. It's an all-age comic, but it's a solid comic. I mean, it's this one person writing and drawing everything, and every bit of it is very enjoyable. I kept seeing this on the shelf and kept thinking, why is nobody buying this? So I kept putting it on display in the store until finally I just said, this is going home with me. And I'm glad it did. There's fantastic paneling about cats in there, about Cat Dad, cute cat faces. It's a pretty simple story, but it's just so cute. It's so wonderful. And then even the bit in the back about the artist is very cute.
Oh.
And I can relate to her because when I had long hair, I was very proud of it. About the author, she her greatest accomplishment to date is her mermaid hair. I was actually doing that. Before I cut off my hair, I was making mermaid hair, just having very long hair. She said, which is prehensile and makes a great cup of coffee. So that alone, I'm pretty sold on her as a human being.
All right.
And yeah, you need this book. It's the best book ever.
How much is
Dad,
it?
King of the Goblins.
It's $12.
Good package.
Best book ever.
By Britt Wilson. Look it up.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nicole. All right, Cole Hornaday, what about you?
Well, this week I'm reading. I read Hellboy, 1953. This is the first part of another one of these decade arcs about young Hellboy. It's written by Hellboy creator Mike Mignola and drawn by Chris Roberson, and has this really great Paolo Rivera, Norman Rockwell style cover, and they've been doing this for these books for a while. I've said it before. Hellboy is one of my all-time favorite characters, but usually when he's depicted by the creator Mike Mignola, who I just think is a genius. So I'm not always a big supporter of all the spin-off books like BPRD. I read them, but I don't covet them the way I do anything that Mike Mignola has actually drawn. And we now Dark Horse now supports this whole Mignola verse with Baltimore the Vampire Slayer, and what are some of the other books that are part of
Lobster
it? Abe Sapien, thank you.
Yeah, Lobster
Johnson. I don't keep up on what's that?
Oh, Joe Golem, sorry.
Yeah, see, I don't keep up on a lot of them because they are kind of pulpy and they're a bit derivative and they just don't excite me. But for some reason, I was in a great space with Hellboy 1953 and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And what I was thinking about was I still have this theory of where Mignola's taking the Hellboy character and the Hellboy universe, and because we know that at some point Hellboy is going to evolve into, and I had to go look it up with Chris's help, he's going to evolve into this demon who rules the earth, named Anan Rama. Is how but here we have teenage Hellboy. He's smoking cigarettes and he's just a very mild mannered kind of guy, and he's not the character that if you are only familiar with the Ron Perlman character from the movies. He's not that guy. He's a much more down to earth, much simpler character. He's not so petulant.
Does he like cats? Would he hang out with Cat Dad?
Well,
in the movie, he did.
In this he has a dog. He has a dog, and when he goes off on the mission, he's concerned about someone looking after his dog for him. So he has that aspect. And it's kind of like very much a monster of the week kind of story set in suburban America. And I'm probably going to keep reading it. I am enjoying it. I like this depiction of Hellboy, and I kind of like the characters and the climactic image of the story. I don't want to give it away. Kind of freaked me out.
No secrets.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, I'll stick with this because I like where this is going. But it is set in the past, and I always kind of wonder, how is this going to inform the Hellboy stories of the future and going forward, and what happens with the whole BPRD, is it Hell on Earth stories? Is that what it's called? Been kind of all encompassing. The Earth is being destroyed by Lovecraftian monsters, kind of thing.
Is that what Hellboy has always looked like, or was Ron Perlman just brilliant casting? Because
Ron Perlman was brilliant casting.
Okay, so Mignola did not base his art on Hellboy.
I think he always had
on Ron
maybe
Perlman.
in the back of his head.
It's possible. I have this T-shirt that is Mignola's illustration of Ron Perlman, and it's just perfect. Because it's the best of both worlds. It's clearly Ron Perlman, but it's drawn by Mignola.
I got to go back and revisit those movies.
Yeah, I'm very fond of the movies. The first one, though, I think is the best. So,
all right, cool. Thanks, Cole. Chris Cassell, what about you?
I read the first issue of Valiant's new Archer and Armstrong title, written by Rafer Roberts with art by David LaFuente, who I really like. LaFuente. He's got a great style. It's a bit cartoony, but it's very well designed, has a great flow. And for context, Armstrong is a immortal, eternal slob. He's not a great warrior, although he's like a big strong guy, but basically all he does is drink, and you're lucky if you encounter him with pants. And Archer is basically like this master fighter who was raised by a cult to basically be a killing machine, and then he decided to leave and become friends with Armstrong. And like he's basically kind of like Iron Fist. He knows all the fighting styles. He's a very polite young man as well. And so as a subplot, Armstrong has a bag, like a pouch, that he can just shove things into, like it's a TARDIS.
Like Felix the Cat's bag?
Yeah, he just keeps on putting things. And whenever he just like finds alcohol, he shoves tons of alcohol in there. Whenever he finds like monsters or people he doesn't like, he just shoves them in there. You're lost in the bag forever.
It's like a video game bag.
Yeah. And so he needs to find something, and the bag will give you what you want whenever you want it. it, but it won't give him something he's looking for. So he goes into the bag, and the whole story starts with a note he left saying, "Hey, Archer, lost something important, went in my bag to find it, back soon." And so it's about this quest to the bag, but there's like monsters and demons and like a labyrinth inside it, and there's goblins that you can't tell their gender, and Archer is very worried that maybe he's a racist because he couldn't tell the difference. And there's just a lot of like little fun, quirky things about it. There's a demon that was banished in there by Armstrong, who's been plotting his revenge for 3,000 years, and Armstrong's just like, it sounds familiar, but I don't know. You're like, how can you forget that? And he's like, I'm sorry, but I'm really old and I drink a lot. So the villain's just like, fine, torture him, whatever. So yeah, it's a lot of fun in one issue, and just starting, so good jump on point. You really don't have to know much about the characters. They're just well written.
How many times, this is one of the many former, well, that's back to Valiant, but how many reboots of, because this is one of the more successful books out of Valiant going back to the 90s, and I'm like, gosh, how many times has this book been rebooted?
At least 4 to 5 times.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
I thought it was closer to a dozen. Okay.
And,
all right.
This the last few times have been more comedic in general, because they're like a super odd couple. Mm-hmm. The super polite young skinny man, and then the big fat like I like to drink guy,
Falstaffian guy.
Yeah, you know. So yeah, it's great.
This is Goblins and Cat Dad.
Goblins and Cat Dad,
which are actually mushrooms.
I see.
Nice.
I love this book so much.
And that's $3.99, so that's kind of an average price.
Okay.
Like you were asking for IDW.
Cool. Yeah. Archer and Armstrong, for, number 1 from Valiant. Thank you, Chris. And well, that's Book Report, and that's our show. And coming up, it's quiz time. But before we go, I want to tell you that the Perfect Bound podcast is brought to you by the Panel Jumper. You can see everything that Cole Hornaday and I do at thepaneljumper.com. Hopefully by this time, episode 4 will be closer to being released. We may have a public viewing of it. Maybe that's already happened by now. We don't know. We're still working the plans out for that. The Perfect Bound podcast is also brought to you by the Comics Dungeon, which is where we are here at 319 Northeast 45th Street in beautiful downtown Wallingford, or 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at comicsdungeon.com. You can also subscribe to the Perfect Bound podcast at perfectboundpodcast.com. Send us an email, perfectboundpodcast@gmail.com. Tell us what we got wrong. I'm sure I've misspoken on a number of things.
I've got nothing wrong about this book.
All right, and now put your quiz hats on, everybody. It's quiz time. This time the questions come to us from me.
What?
We're going to be, previous quiz had you answering fictional media outlets. But let's see if you can identify which movies, TV shows, or comics are home to these fictional eating and drinking establishments. Now, you can see my computer screen, so no cheating, Chris. All right, so I'm gonna give you a bar or a restaurant or a tavern, and you have to tell me what title that appears in. It's a TV show, movie, or comic. Number 1, 10 Forward. Cole Hornaday.
Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yes, sir. Number 2, The Bronze. Chris Casso.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yes, sir. Number 3, The Ink and Paint Club. All right, nobody I get that one. It's Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Oh, wow.
Number 4, Mac Adams' Old Oil House. Chris, you should get this one. Or maybe it's pronounced Macadam.
Macadams. Yeah,
Macadams.
yeah, Transformers.
Yeah, Transformers. All right, and finally, and this is the hardest one, I think, Munden's Bar. Cole?
Grimjack.
Yes, sir. Munden's Bar.
Because the Ninja Turtles visited there once.
IO9 calls it the Cheers of the comic book world. Everyone might not know your name, but you know everyone else's.
Bingo.
That's our show. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.